you're standing at the edge of the Thames in 1896. The water is black, swollen with rain and secrets older than memory. A bargeman pulls something from the current. A carpet bag, heavy, leaking. He opens it. Inside, the body of an infant, strangled with white edging tape, wrapped like a parcel meant for delivery. But this is not one child. This is the beginning of an excavation. Over the coming weeks, they will find more. 6 bodies pulled from the river. Then whispers of dozens buried in gardens, stuffed beneath floorboards, discarded in alleyways. Then hundreds, maybe more. The dead so small they fit in handbags. So silent they were forgotten before they even had names. Victorian England does not shatter because babies die. It shatters because someone turned their deaths into a business model. Someone calculated profit in the weight of small bones. Someone smiled while signing documents, while collecting fees, while writing false addresses in perfect penmanship. The river becomes a graveyard. The white tape becomes a signature. And somewhere in the fog, a woman walks free. Who could do this? And why did no one stop her? We pull back from the river now, away from the bodies, into the world that made them possible. Victorian England, 1860s to 1890s. A society suffocating under the weight of its own morality, where respectability was survival and shame was a death sentence. Illegitimate children were called bastards by law and conscience alike. Unwed mothers were cast out from their families, fired from their positions, left to starve in workhouses or sell their bodies on street corners. There was no help, no mercy, only judgment. And into this rot, a solution emerged. Baby farmers. Women who, for a fee, would take these unwanted infants. They promised care, adoption, a future. Advertisements ran in newspapers. Loving home wanted for infant, generous terms. Mothers desperate and broken would hand over their children, along with every penny they had, believing they were buying salvation. On the surface, it looked like charity. Beneath it was a marketplace of desperation. Society didn't just allow this. It required it. The same culture that damned unmarried mothers for their sin created the system that disappeared their children. The same lawmakers who wrote morality into law turned blind eyes to the carriages full of infants that never returned. This was complicity dressed as compassion. And Amelia Dyer understood exactly how to profit from it. But who was she before she became a monster? Amelia Elizabeth Hobley. Born 1837 in a small Bristol village, daughter of a shoemaker. Raised in a household where mental illness was not a condition, it was a curse. Her mother suffered from what Victorians called madness, severe psychological episodes that no one understood and everyone feared. Young Amelia watched her unravel, watched her locked away in rooms that smelled of sweat and laudanum, watched her medicated into silence, restrained, treated like an animal that needed caging. When her mother died, Amelia inherited more than grief. She inherited a genetic and emotional legacy, depression that clawed at her from the inside, instability that made the world feel like shifting ground, and the gnawing belief that love was conditional. That care was transactional, that people were burdens to be managed, not souls to be cherished. She trained as a nurse. She learned how to soothe, how to heal, how to perform compassion. She married. She had children. On paper, she was respectable, a proper Victorian woman with a proper Victorian life. But inside, something had already broken. Trauma does not excuse cruelty, but it does explain the architecture of it. Amelia had been taught by blood and by experience that suffering was inevitable, that the weak were disposable, that survival required cold calculation, And when her own life began to fall apart, when poverty and desperation closed in, she turned to the one currency Victorian society gave broken women: other people's shame. Her husband dies. Amelia is left alone, middle-aged, no income, debts piling like stones on her chest. She could have found work as a nurse, but nursing paid poorly and demanded dignity she no longer had the strength to perform. So she remembers. She remembers the desperate mothers she'd seen in her nursing days, the ones who begged for help, the ones who would pay anything, sacrifice everything, to make their problem disappear. She places an ad in the newspaper. Married couple with no family would adopt a healthy child. Premium, $10. The word premium is key. It means a one-time payment, no ongoing support, no questions asked, no trail. A mother responds, young, terrified. She hands over her baby, soft, warm, breathing, along with 10 pounds. Everything she has. Amelia promises a good home, a future, love. The baby is dead within days, smothered, strangled with white edging tape, or simply neglected until starvation does the work quietly, without witness. This is the moment. Not an accident, not a tragedy of circumstance. A calculation. Amelia didn't stumble into murder. She engineered it. She looked at a crying infant and saw profit. She looked at a mother's desperation and saw opportunity. She had crossed a line most people never even approach. And once you've done it once, the second time is easier. Amelia perfects her system. She moves frequently, Reading, Bristol, London, always staying ahead of suspicion, always one step ahead of the questions that might come. She changes her name like a snake shedding skin. Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Harding, Mrs. Williams. She places ads in newspapers across England, casting a wide net into the ocean of desperation. The language is always warm, maternal, trustworthy. A respectable woman seeks to adopt a child. Loving home guaranteed. Desperate mothers respond. They meet Amelia in train stations, parlors, rented rooms that smell of tea and false comfort. She is kind. She listens. She holds their hands and tells them everything will be all right. She is convincing. She takes the baby. She takes the money. She disappears. Some infants die immediately, smothered in the first night, their cries silenced before they can even register as memory. Others linger for weeks, slowly starving in her care while she pockets their maintenance fees, writing letters to mothers about how well their children are thriving. Then she wraps their small bodies in cloth, ties them with white edging tape, her signature, her brand, and disposes of them in rivers, ditches, shallow graves no one will ever search. The process becomes industrial. She's no longer a grieving widow making bad choices. She's a predator running a death mill. Murder has become routine, mechanical, profitable. But even predators leave traces. By the 1870s, whispers follow Amelia wherever she goes. Neighbors notice the smell, something sour and wrong seeping through walls. Landlords find soiled linens stuffed behind furniture. Small clothes abandoned in haste when she flees in the night. Mothers who've handed over their children start asking questions. Where is my baby? Can I visit? Why haven't you written? Amelia's excuses grow thinner. The child was adopted by a family in the country. The child fell ill. The child is thriving, but visits aren't possible right now. In 1879, a doctor reports suspicious infant deaths in her care. She's arrested. Finally, someone is paying attention. She's convicted, not of murder, but of neglect. 6 months of hard labor. A slap on the wrist for a woman who'd already buried dozens. It should have ended there. But the system is too broken, too overwhelmed, too indifferent to the deaths of children no one wanted in the first place. She's released. She changes her name again. She moves again. She starts again. And no one stops her. This is the tragic irony. She was caught, punished, and then set loose to continue, because no one wanted to look too closely at what baby farming really was. Because confronting it meant confronting the rot at the center of Victorian morality itself. So they let her walk. And for 2 more decades, she killed freely. The 1880s and 1890s are Amelia's golden years. She's elderly now, white-haired, matronly, soft-spoken and gentle in appearance, the perfect disguise for a woman running an empire of death. She recruits her daughter and son-in-law into the operation. It becomes a family business. They rent homes under false names, place ads in multiple newspapers, collect babies like inventory, and dispose of bodies with assembly line efficiency. The process is refined, optimized, ruthlessly effective. Estimates suggest she killed between 200 and 400 infants during this period. But the true number will never be known. Many bodies were never found, dissolved in rivers, buried in unmarked graves, hidden in places no one thought to search. Many mothers never reported their missing children because they were too ashamed, too frightened, or too powerless to demand answers from a system that had already abandoned them. This is the heart of the horror, not individual brutality, though that existed in every strangled breath, every tiny body wrapped in tape. But scale, systematization, the transformation of murder into method. Amelia didn't kill in fits of rage or desperation. She killed the way factories produced goods. She killed with planning, with logistics, with profit margins calculated in the weight of small corpses. This wasn't passion. This wasn't madness. This was capitalism applied to human life. And it worked for decades. So how did it finally end? March the 30th, 1896. A bargeman on the Thames pulls a carpetbag from the water near Reading. Heavy, waterlogged. He opens it and the world tilts. Inside, the body of a baby girl, maybe a year old, strangled with white edging tape wrapped tight around her throat. The tape is distinctive, wide, clean, the kind used for dressmaking, for finishing edges, now repurposed as a ligature. This detail will crack everything open. Police trace the tape, the bag, the wrapping paper inside. They follow the thread back through pawn shops and post offices, through false names and rented rooms. They find a name, Mrs. Thomas. They find an address. They knock on Amelia Dyer's door. She's calm at first, charming even, an elderly woman confused by the intrusion. She insists there's been a mistake. She knows nothing about any child. But when they search her home, they find what she couldn't hide. Stacks of baby clothes, tiny shoes, bonnets, gowns, more than any household would need. Pawn tickets for infants' belongings. Letters from desperate mothers asking about their children. And more white tape, rolls of it. The machinery of murder grinds to a halt. The predators cornered. But the arrest is only the beginning. Now comes the reckoning. Amelia is arrested. The police begin dredging the Thames. Within days they find 5 more bodies. All infants, all strangled, all wrapped in the same white tape, the same meticulous method, her signature written in death. The investigation expands. Other rivers, other towns, other names she used, other homes she fled. They estimate dozens, then hundreds. The numbers climb until they lose meaning, until each body becomes a statistic rather than a stolen life. Mothers come forward, trembling, clutching old advertisements torn from newspapers, their edges worn from being folded and unfolded in desperate hands. They ask the question that will haunt them forever. Is my baby one of them? Most will never know. The bodies are too decomposed, faces unrecognizable, the records too sparse. Amelia kept no logs, no documentation, no evidence of the lives she extinguished. She discarded children like waste. During interrogation, her mask begins to crack. She admits to adopting children. She admits some died in her care, but from natural causes, she insists. Illness, weakness, tragedy, not murder. But she won't say how many, she won't say where they are. She offers partial confessions, then retracts them. She claims madness. Hereditary insanity passed down from her mother. She calls them mercy killings, saving unwanted children from lives of suffering. Her defense is a performance. Half truth, half manipulation, and the world watches, horrified. The trial would become a spectacle. May 1896. The trial of Amelia Dyer begins at the Old Bailey. The courtroom is packed. Journalists fight for seats. The public is ravenous, not for justice, but for spectacle, for the grotesque details they can consume like entertainment. The prosecution presents the white tape, the letters written in Amelia's hand, promising love and care. The bodies pulled from the Thames, small and broken. They call grieving mothers to the stand. One woman describes handing her baby to Amelia, warm, alive, trusting, and never seeing her again. She paid £10 for that trust, for that lie. Another mother sobs as she identifies clothing pulled from the river. A bonnet she sewed herself. Proof that her child is gone. The defense argues insanity, her mother's madness, her own psychological breakdowns, the laudanum she consumed daily, dulling her mind, eroding her judgment. They paint her as a tragic figure, a woman broken by circumstance, by heredity, by a cruel world. But the jury isn't swayed, the evidence is too overwhelming, the cruelty too calculated, the scale too vast. The trial lasts 5 days. The jury deliberates for 4.5 minutes. Guilty, death by hanging. The courtroom erupts, justice, they call it, closure. But the verdict doesn't answer the real question. Why? Was she insane? Was she evil? Was she simply a product of her environment, a broken woman shaped by a broken world? Amelia gives inconsistent answers. She claims she was saving the children, rescuing them from lives of poverty, shame, and suffering. She calls it mercy, compassion, a twisted kindness. But her letters, the ones police recovered from her homes, reveal something colder. She called the infants little objects. She referred to their deaths as getting rid of them. She counted the money she earned per body with the precision of an accountant tallying profits. Psychiatrists diagnose her with moral insanity, a Victorian term for what we now call sociopathy. The absence of empathy, the inability to see others as human. But the truth is more uncomfortable than a simple diagnosis. Amelia wasn't incomprehensibly mad. She was responding rationally to a society that devalued certain lives and rewarded their disappearance. She saw a market demand, unwanted children, desperate mothers, a culture of shame, and she filled it. Victorian England didn't just fail to stop her, it created her, it fed her. It profited from the silence she provided. Amelia was a monster. But she was a monster Victorian England built, nurtured, and only punished when the bodies became impossible to ignore. Her final days were spent writing letters. In prison, awaiting execution, Amelia writes letters. Some are to her daughter, full of self-pity, deflection, the language of a victim rather than a perpetrator. She speaks of her suffering, her loneliness, the unfairness of her fate. Some are to authorities, offering half-confessions wrapped in excuses, fragments of truth buried in manipulation. In one letter, she admits to killing many children. But she won't specify how many, won't name them, won't map the graves, only she knows. In another, she blames her mental state, her laudanum addiction that clouded her judgment, her desperate poverty that left her no choice. She writes about her own mother's madness, as if inherited trauma justifies inherited cruelty, as if witnessing suffering gives you permission to inflict it. The letters are manipulative, self-serving, and heartbreaking, not because they inspire sympathy, but because they reveal a woman who, even facing death, cannot fully confront what she's done. She rewrites the narrative. She casts herself as tragic, not monstrous, as broken, not calculating, but the ink on the page cannot erase the white tape around small throats. The words cannot resurrect the bodies in the river. Even in her final moments, she seeks absolution without accountability. And then the letters stop. On June 10, 1896, Amelia Dyer walked to the gallows. June 10, 1896, Holloway Prison, London. Amelia Dyer is led to the gallows. She's 57 years old, white-haired, calm. Her face betrays nothing. No fear, no remorse, no final revelation. The executioner asks if she has any last words. She reportedly says, "I have nothing to say." The noose is placed around her neck. The white cap pulled over her face, an echo of the white tape she used on so many others. The trapdoor opens. She drops. Her neck breaks, clean, efficient. She dies instantly. Outside the prison, crowds gather. Some cheer, some weep. The newspapers call it justice, the righteous end of a monster. But justice for whom? The mothers never got their children back. The bodies were never all found. Most remain nameless, uncounted, dissolved into rivers and unmarked graves. And the system that enabled Amelia, the laws that shamed unwed mothers, the silence that protected baby farmers, the complicity that let her kill for decades, remained unchanged. Her death was necessary. But it solved nothing. The rope snapped her neck, but it didn't snap the machinery of cruelty she operated within. In the aftermath, England had to confront what it had allowed. After Amelia's execution, there was a brief moment of national reckoning. Newspapers ran exposés on baby farming. Investigative journalists uncovered other cases, other names, other women running similar operations in the shadows. Politicians stood in Parliament and called for reform. Public outrage demanded change. The Infant Life Protection Act was strengthened. Foster homes would now require registration. Regular inspections would be mandated. Oversight would be implemented. On paper, it looked like progress. But the changes were superficial. Illegitimate children were still stigmatized, still called bastards, still treated as stains on family honor. Unwed mothers were still shamed, still cast out, still left with impossible choices and no support. The economic and social conditions that created the demand for baby farmers remained intact. And so, other Amelia Dyers continued to operate in the shadows, just more carefully, more quietly, with better excuses and cleaner records. The case faded from public memory within a decade. Amelia became a footnote, a Victorian horror story, a cautionary tale divorced from the conditions that made her possible. She was punished. But the system that created her, that fed her, that profited from her silence, that only stopped her when the bodies became undeniable, was not. The machinery kept running. So, what are we left with? Over 400 infants, maybe more, died at Amelia Dyer's hands. Most were never identified, never named, never claimed. They exist now only as estimates, forensic footnotes in criminal history textbooks, ghosts in the Thames, their bodies long since dissolved into water and time. Their mothers lived with the not knowing. the shame that silenced their grief, the questions that could never be answered. Did my baby suffer? Was there a moment of warmth before the cold? Did anyone hold them as they died? Victorian society moved on, eager to forget, eager to bury the story along with the bodies, but the ghosts remain. Every time we talk about Amelia Dyer, we're forced to confront uncomfortable truths. That societies create the conditions for atrocity. That cruelty often wears a kind face and speaks in soothing tones. That the most vulnerable, the unwanted, the illegitimate, the inconvenient, are always the first to be sacrificed. That we build systems that devalue certain lives, and then act shocked when someone profits from that devaluation. The white tape, the river, the small bones. These are not just relics of Victorian horror. They are warnings, reminders that every era has its Amelia Dyers, people who see cracks in our morality and exploit them, people who turn our collective shame into their personal profit. But this story isn't just about the past. Amelia Dyer's story feels distant. Gaslight, corsets, the Thames in 1896, a Victorian nightmare safely contained in history books. But the mechanisms that enabled her are still with us. We still criminalize poverty, still punish people for being poor, for being desperate, for making choices we'd never have to make. We still stigmatize single mothers, judging them, underfunding them, offering condemnation instead of support. We still create systems where the vulnerable must hide, where desperation breeds exploitation, where certain lives are deemed disposable. Today, it's not baby farmers operating from rented rooms with newspaper ads. It's unregulated adoption agencies trafficking children across borders. Human trafficking networks that disappear people into labor and sexual slavery. Migrant detention centers where children are separated from families and lost in bureaucratic voids, some never reunited, some never accounted for. The specifics change, the technology evolves, the language modernizes, but the structure remains. A society that devalues certain people, the poor, the immigrant, the illegitimate, the inconvenient, and then profits from their invisibility, that creates conditions of desperation and then criminalizes the desperate for surviving within them. Amelia Dyer is not an anomaly. She is a symptom of systems we continue to build, maintain, and defend. We have not learned. We have simply made our cruelty more sophisticated, more bureaucratic, more deniable. So what do we do with this knowledge? Why tell this story? Why dredge up the bodies, the tape, the river? Why pull these ghosts from the water and force them into the light? Not for entertainment, not for shock value, not to indulge in Victorian Gothic horror like it's a dark fairy tale, but because forgetting is complicity. When we erase the Amelias, when we reduce them to monsters divorced from context, we erase the systems that made them possible. When we forget the nameless infants, we make it easier to ignore the nameless victims of today. We lose the lessons written in their deaths. Remembering is an act of resistance. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What systems exist today that enable cruelty? Who profits from vulnerability? What would we rather not see? It demands we confront the gap between our stated values and our actual practices, between the compassion we claim and the indifference we enact. It requires us to look at the invisible people in our own societies, the ones we've decided don't matter, don't count, don't deserve protection, and ask, who is profiting from their suffering? Who benefits from their silence? You have a responsibility now, not to feel guilty, not to perform outrage, but to see, to recognize the patterns, to question the systems, to refuse to look away when it's inconvenient, Because the white tape and the river are not relics, they are warnings, and the water is still rising. You're back at the Thames, the water is still black, still swollen with rain and secrets older than memory. The river still flows, indifferent, eternal, carrying everything toward the sea. Somewhere beneath the surface are bones that were never found, names that were never spoken, lives that were erased before they even began. Amelia Dyer is long dead, hanged in 1896, her body buried in an unmarked grave within the prison walls. Victorian England is long gone, the gaslights extinguished, the corsets discarded. The empire crumbled, but the weight remains. This story doesn't have a clean ending. It doesn't tie up neatly with justice served and lessons learned. Because the systems that created Amelia Dyer, the shame, the silence, the devaluation of certain lives, are still alive, still hungry, still waiting for the next person desperate enough or cruel enough to feed them. The white tape has changed form, but it still wraps around throats we choose not to see. The river still accepts what we throw into it, and we still look away. The water flows on, endless and indifferent, carrying its secrets toward the sea, secrets we buried, secrets we ignored, secrets we profited from. The ghosts remain, and the silence after is deafening. Fade to black. Silence